Okay, and here we are. It's Tuesdays at Startup TNT, investment prep video series. Today we've got Leggy Gafford joining us, along with Tim Lin, of course. So the theme for this series is to discuss kind of the inside view on what it's like to go through due diligence. And today I'm really happy to bring on one of our alumni for our very first investment summit, Leggy, one of the founders of Future Fields. And we're going to be talking about communicating to the investors. And we're going to go through everything in the next 30 minutes from the pitch deck, the initial meeting, sharing the data room, and then negotiating the final deal, and then maintaining the relationship through investor updates, all of which Future Fields has done a tremendous job of. And so I'm really happy to get the feedback here from Leggy. Leggy, you want to say hello? Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I am glad to be here. And I hope my ultra opinionated viewpoints will be helpful for those listening and watching.
And then we got Tim here. Tim, you want to say hello? Tim's been with us with every single one of these so far. How you doing today, Tim?
Good, man. How are you?
Not bad. Drinking seltzer because it's only noon at Tuesday at TNT. Okay, Leggy, let's kick it off with just a little bit of context here. Future Fields, quick history of Future Fields. When were you guys founded? You went through a couple of accelerators. You've raised some money. What's the quick lowdown on Future Fields?
Yes, so Future Fields started formally in 2018 with myself and my two co-founders, Matt and Jillian. We started as a consumer-facing company in the cellular agriculture space, trying to do the hardest thing possible, which was make chicken from a local Edmonton chicken using cells. And we were successful at that MVP stage when we first started. We ended up with a $3,000 per pound chicken nugget, which wasn't very useful at the time because chicken was $1.34 at the time. And we eventually discovered a way to reduce our core cost on that, which led to us pivoting to become a B2B enterprise, supplying growth factors and growth media to reduce the cost of these products globally to over 1,000 times. And that did result in us, luckily, being part of Startup TNT. And we were fortunate enough to raise capital there. And from that, we were able to get into Y Combinator. So we are a Y Combinator company as of last summer. Whew, that went by fast. And we successfully raised our seed round last September across multiple investors for a total of 2.2 million USD. And now we are heads down, scaling up towards the next fundraise.
Awesome. And you didn't even mention that you also got invited to pitch at South by Southwest, one of the most elite pitch events in the world.
Yes, that is true. We were 2021 South by Southwest finalists. It was very interesting. There's a comment I will make on that.
Okay, Leggy, here's what I want to start off with. I warned you I was going to do this. I actually have the pitch deck that you used a year ago at Startup TNT.
Yeah, I hate it now. It's so
You
awful.
hate it now. I thought it was beautiful. I like it. I think it's simple. I think it really clearly tells us about your company, which is doing something really complex, and I think hits all the major points that an investor is looking for. So, well, actually, tell us about your logo. Where did you guys come up with this logo? Start us off with that.
Yeah, so I spent a fair bit of time on that with a designer friend of mine. This was in 2017 when we first started talking about the company, even before the formal incorporation. It is both well plates for cells. It is cells, little circles, kind of abstract. It is also circular crops. And if you look at it, there's actually two F's hidden in there as well at the same time. So you had to have those multiple layers. And it was fortunate enough that we went through a few iterations, but it has stuck and will continue to stick.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Well, thanks for that background. I really like your color scheme. It's simple, and I'm going to flip through your deck here. So, you start off with a simple description of the team. I don't want to spend too much time talking about just your deck, but this is what I like about it. Simple description of the team. Then you go to, you have an existing prototype. You mentioned it earlier in the chat, okay, credibility. You guys have built cellular agriculture products yourselves. very simple definition of the problem too, you know?
Yes.
Growth media is really expensive. This is the biggest hurdle to the industry. And then, okay, tell us a little bit about this slide. This is like your solution slide. You produce it, the growth media at 99% cheaper than the competition. Is this also, are these custom built, these slides, by one of your developer friends? How do you make this cute little graphic here?
Yes, I put this deck together with the rest of the team. We did have a friend who is a designer do the individual illustrations so we could reuse them in multiple places. To back up a bit, as there's really 5 core parts to the entire deck, which is really the title. So intro slide containing the name of your company, logo if you have one. And one thing that is not in here ideally is a short version of the one-liner, which is actually missing on here, which we have put that on there now. Second thing, as you pointed out, is the traction. So the most compelling evidence of progress for your startup. And the order is, of course, up to who you're presenting to, what you want to get out of it. But if your main KPI is revenue, this should be a graph of the revenue. If your main KPI is active users, there should be a graph of user growth. Whatever is the most impactful part of your KPIs, to put that first. The team, which we had, showing why we were the best in the world to build our business. Our market and business model, which are on the market slide right now. And as you're showing, the insight. So what was the non-obvious and counterintuitive insight about the market or their business that will surprise investors or teach them something new? And that really is like the core parts of the entire deck that you're looking at right now.
Yeah, and one thing I think is interesting about your deck and your industry, because it is pretty nascent, or you say that there's only 48 cultured meat companies worldwide, which is basically all your customers. And then these logos here, did you pick logos here that are people that you're in conversation with or have letters of interest with, or is this just showcasing what the industry looks like?
At the time, these are ones we were in early conversations with, but they were publicly searchable. So then that way it wasn't in conflict with any agreements that we had, but also gave investors who are looking at it the ability to look these up, because investors don't understand, they'll never invest. So we wanted to include them so people could find more background information on these companies.
Okay. And then you also mentioned, kind of as your summary there, like the 5 key components, pilot customers. You say right here in the slide 5 to date. I think maybe at the time you couldn't share who those were publicly, but you point out that you've already got kind of 5 either pilots signed or letters of interest. I forget if they were at this time.
Yes.
Showing that credibility, traction.
Yes.
Okay, and then you have the ask in there at the end. How much money you're trying to raise? Which did you hit that 3.3 million overall over last year?
Well, we surpassed it.
Did you?
Yeah, which was very fortunate. But yeah, this clear ask was something that we learned it didn't have originally pre the Startup TNT, like in 2018. So this is an additional part that was very important to add to the deck to make it clear.
Now, I really like this deck. I think it really stands out to me for its simplicity and it, like sort of clearly defining what you guys need, what you guys do. But you told me before this conversation that your new deck is way better. So like, what have you improved or changed since then?
Yeah, the biggest thing is avoiding complex diagrams and screenshots and trying to keep it simple. So like, especially with things like, how do you show your revenue graph if that's your core KPI? Stuff like that can look really complex, but trying to keep it as simple as possible and trying to really focus on stating in conclusion in the headline of each slide and just really using the body as supporting evidence along with the whole one idea per slide kind of thing. So every single slide, there's a very clear point to it that no matter who's looking at it, they don't have to guess. It is like the largest text and they know what this is for. So it is something that if you're talking about it, it is clear what you're talking about. But if you're emailing it in advance of a meeting, it is also very clear. It is really a question that we dialed up the clarity and removed as much distraction as possible.
Okay, thanks, Ledgy. We're already almost 15 minutes in. We can't talk just about your pitch deck because I want to talk about like communicating to investors overall. And maybe Tim, maybe you want to kick off the next part of the conversation, which is the intro call or the cold call. Tips and tricks, thoughts for like making that cold call, making that first introduction to really any investor, whether or not it's an angel investor or a VC. Tim, what's your recommendations?
My recommendation is don't go cold.
Don't go cold.
Get an intro.
Good advice.
I mean, I think that's what's helpful about TNT is that it's effectively a warm intro to dozens of people who are interested in helping the community. If you just roll in and like rich people in Alberta and then you like bomb them with emails, you're never going to get anywhere. That's just spam. So warm intros is supremely helpful.
Ledgy, is that how it's worked for you in terms of successful introductions to investors? The warmest ones worked best?
Yes, I 100% agree with that because the best conversations we had are ones where it did feel less like a pitch. There was already something that either they saw us, we already spoke to them, someone else told them to talk to us. So it got started as an actual conversation as opposed to, the cold salesman style call.
To that point,
like, go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
I was going to say to that point, like getting a warm intro is work for the person making the introduction, and so to make their life easier, and to lubricate the wheels of that introduction is super helpful. So like having a brief introduction that's like, hey, if you can introduce me to this person, that would be spectacular, and then they can like forward it. See below, this person's awesome. You guys should chat. Makes it a hell of a lot easier than having to like write paragraphs about what's going on or like have a conversation or whatever. Just use that person's trust with the third party that you're trying to get in with and make it easy for them to do so.
And how do you get those warm intros, Ledgy? Do you have any good stories for us where it's like you wanted to get an intro to someone and this was the strategy you used to get that warm intro?
Yeah, honestly, it varies by stage and what industry you're in. So in our case, us being in hard tech equivalent, deep biotechnology, the space and expertise was smaller. So there's really less targets to hit. So in our case, we actually did leverage the PR that we initially got, and this is pre-Startup TNT, to get attention from some early investors to get those warm intros. And really being able to leverage the networks of those that you can ask that from. That is the key part, is if you have a investor or maybe a co-founder, maybe even a friend that can honestly do that warm intro and not with the purpose of selling, that is effective. And it can be kind of self-reinforcing from there. If you can continually keep that flywheel moving forward with introductions.
Yeah, on that note, Ledgy, I'm curious, like, was there a tangible difference in the quality of the intros or the relationship with the intros before you graduated from Y Combinator compared to after you graduated from Y Combinator? Like, what impact did Y Combinator have on that process of getting warm intros and being taken seriously?
Yes. You could say that the entire point of that condensed time is to do exactly that. Creates a race condition between a global set of thousands of investors. So it was extremely helpful for us. The biggest thing for us going into that, even beforehand, which we didn't have this super tight before YC, is going in with a plan, even before the intros, like a simple one. Like, what is your core? This is what we want to do. This is how much we want to raise and how we're going to use it. And then along with that, here's the backup if we get nothing. Even within the YC, those two things are still important, even in that group, because you never know how it's going to turn out. And the biggest lesson, I think, of how we've matured as a leadership team as well, is being super direct, especially when you're like three people with no money and you're talking to someone that literally might have hundreds of millions of dollars. It can be pretty intimidating, and you might tend to want to defer to them in the conversation, but they are coming to you to learn just as much about your company as you are asking for them for investment. So being forward with that when you can seize that is very easy to lose track of.
So was that one of the primary benefits at Y Combinator, is helping you with that preparation standpoint about like how to give a credible sort of impression in that first investor meeting?
Yes, yeah, it definitely was. But it's more, even outside of YC, even though I'll emphasize this, is it is really about understanding what you need to do as a business and sticking to it. Like investment is a vehicle to make your business take off. And that you will run across investors that maybe don't align with your mission and what you need to do, but you still might be interested in them. And there'll be those who you're not sure about. And if you don't have that clear pathway, it will be very hard to make choices. And you can fall into taking investment where it might not be appropriate, or even missing it when it might have been, if you don't have that plan. And it really is about, yeah, make sure you know what you're doing, have your one-liner, have your outcomes, but actually try to do it and talk to your customers. Everything else outside of your customers and what you need to do a business is almost fluff in compared to everything else.
Okay, tell us a little bit more. Like the next thing I want to talk about was preparing for the first meeting, but you've touched on this a little bit. But why don't you tell us a little bit about more detail on like that, what you just mentioned? I know after you graduate from Y Combinator, you create a lot of buzz around the company by virtue of graduating from Y Combinator, and you got a bunch of people reaching out to you. How are you guys prioritizing which of these investors you think is the best fit for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of different tactics. The basic points kind of universally is, as I mentioned, have your plan. Could be 3 points. I want to raise $2 million to do XYZ in W time frame. Something like that is always your starting point. Use an Excel sheet or Airtable or something similar. You should not be ad hocing meeting with investors. Write down their names, write down their funds, do a bit of background research, and look at their other investments. Even maybe going so far as trying to reach out to companies they've invested in if they're really pivotal, and practice beforehand. It is uncomfortable and it can suck. But if you have a co-founder or employees, or even if you're alone, record yourself talking on camera, which can be really awkward, going through your key points, and watch it back. Have people quiz you beforehand, so you're prepared beforehand to make the ask and control the conversation.
Tim, any other points to add to that in terms of like preparing for the data for the meeting? Those are really good points, Leggy.
No, I think Leggy hits it right on the head. Definitely has the expert background from going through the program. So yeah, yeah, no, I from an investor perspective, it's largely around like you see the pitch and you're like, all right, this is super cool, and then most of the rest of it is like that's the most excited that the investor will get, and then everything else is just making sure that it isn't full of shit. And so it's like that's most of what the conversation is from there on out.
And how much of your time is this conversation taking, Leggy? When you were in the thick of raising the round, is this now a full-time job for you compared to other aspects of the business?
At the time, it 100% was. I think if an individual is getting a lot of positive traction with their round, or if they do have multiple investors that are like, looks like you might end up with a lead, do not expect to be able to do other stuff. And if you have co-founders, have a direct conversation of like, I'm going to focus on fundraising and you continue to focus on the business for this section of time, because it is a section of time. And it should be a clear single points of contacts, so that if you are the person doing the fundraise, you can manage all that and have clear points of when you need to bring in the rest of your team on those pieces.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit about the details now of like actually closing the deal. So after you have that meeting, at what point are you sharing your data room, Leggy?
The honest answer is it depends on who you're talking to. So a data room can be many things, and it varies by many geographies, which sounds weird to say, but I actually mean it. In that what investors will ask of you in a data room is going to vary by investor. But it is always good to cover your basics, have your key metrics, have your finances if you have them, have outlines of the team members. Functionally, it is important to use something like DocSend as a very specific example, where you can easily replicate and control the links to the data room so you know who you're sending them to, you know who has access to them. In general, for when to send it, my own experience at least is you should not send these things in advance. You should not send them in advance of speaking to the investor first. It should be something that is very specific to move the conversation forward. If it looks like it is good to go, do not send it if things seem waffly or in the middle, because it's all about your surface area of what you're exposing. Because it's way too easy to look at something and not have someone talk to you and come up with a different conclusion if you don't have context.
Yeah. Okay. And then trust too, like this is a trust industry. Generally investors don't like to sign NDAs, but you also have to kind of build up a bit of a relationship before you share that sensitive information. Any further comments on that, Leggy, around building up a rapport with the investors?
Yeah. I'm a pretty big subscriber to the handshake protocol, where if you as an entrepreneur are talking with an investor and vice versa, if you're making a very clear request as like, yes, I would like to pursue this further, may I look at your data room? And it is very like that direct, and asking those direct, would you like to see our data room to pursue this further? Like looking for a clear yes or no, because that mutual handshake protocol, clear understanding, can be all you need in many cases. The case is different if you have an investor who is invested in a competitor company. You should ask them how they deal with competitive investments. Be very direct about it, especially if they're a large, well, if they have a lot of cash and they have a lot of investments, there's a chance they might have competitive investments, and ask them directly. But having an NDA is not necessarily possible, but if you do have a very specific secret sauce, it is still okay to ask, and they can tell you yes or no.
Yeah. Tim brought up something in an earlier conversation that he recommends it can be valuable to have almost like a two-tiered data room where you share just a little bit of information up front, and then as the conversation progresses, you share more details. Did you use an approach like that, or what did you do, Leggy?
Yes, to a degree, but our lower tier, we didn't call it the data room. One thing we did do specifically is we did depend on always getting to the conversation first, or having the meeting at least scheduled first. As in like, don't send a deck until the meeting is in your calendar, kind of idea. And that first tier was really the deck, and additional key materials specifically on the team, a little bit on the market. In the higher level tier, we did exclude stuff like finance until it was further along in the conversation.
And you mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but I just want to get your perspective on it, because I've heard entrepreneurs talk about this either from experience or in like a romantic idea of what it's like to raise money in the Valley. People just like have a 1 hour meeting, they like you, and they say, here's $150,000. Is that how it works, Leggy?
Well, that isn't how it worked for us, but I'm still surprised because we still have heard stories like that. I mean, network effects are crazy. They can happen, but I mean, it depends on the macro market conditions as well. Because if you're in an area like 2008 was, I'm pretty sure that was not happening. But it really is thinking about this as much as you would think about a customer. The investor has a job, and you have a job, and you can treat it as such, and you can have mutual respect for that back and forth. Like you're allowed to ask clearly yes or no. You're allowed to reject people if it does not fit, and respectfully say that. And it is to treat the investment activity as a capability for the business and understand where you're weak in it, what needs to improve, and being very focused on it and not have it as a side of the table task.
Right on. I see a question in the chat here, which I think is referencing an earlier point you made.
Yes, the question, I will say it out loud, is from Benji. If you say you exclude finance, what exactly do you mean? So I would not send our financial statements in a data room to an investor until we had a clear conversation first, the pitch, quote unquote, and they clearly gave a yes of, yes, I would like to take this further. Stuff like financial statements, pro formas, forecasts, if they're asking for it, are pretty extreme, especially as a startup. You don't know where you're going to be at in 3 years. A lot of it is BS. So those are things that I would not send till I did the pitch first, and they articulated a clear interest as, yes, I'd want to pursue this further.
Thanks, Leggy. All right, tell us a little bit about like the final negotiations that you went through. In terms of like, what was that like? Any tips and tricks on that front? Did you come out with a set of terms? Did you work with one specific investor to renegotiate those terms? What was that experience like for you?
This is probably the hardest part. We were fortunate in that the connections and the experience that we had between us and who we were talking with early on gave us this good outline of how to structure the agreements and the type that we wanted. And it went back to the whole, have your standard game plan and your backup plan. We did go in knowing of what types of agreements that we wanted, which is not necessarily common. But we were fortunate and we had people to talk to about that. Knowing what you want to try to hit. So whether it's a safe, or whether you be okay with taking on debt, or whether or not you be okay with like interest or pro rata and things like that, it all comes back to what do you want to do with the business? Having a single page outline of your thoughts on here's what I want to get, and looking these things up yourself, even if you've never looked at it before. Not trying to plug YC, their startup library has every single thing about pro ratas or safe or debt. And we'll take time to look at that in advance of even starting your fundraising, just so when those things come up, you know what to do. Because you might have a really strong investor who maybe wants more aggressive terms, but you still want to make sure you know how that's fair for you as a founder as well.
And what was it like in the fall when you raised like a couple $1 million? Who were you working with? Were you working with a VC fund or just a lead angel investor to kind of settle those final terms?
We were working with a VC group to settle those final terms. They wrote the largest check size. And fortunately for us, they were also the most in alignment with us, which maybe those things actually went together. They were in alignment. They wanted to give us more money. It makes sense. So it was 48 hours of pretty intense negotiation, all the way to being through text at like 1 a.m. To actually come to those terms of what they needed to see, what we wanted to get out of it. And it was a mutually respectful negotiation to come to the end of that. It is that lead investor kind of idea, though you really want to get into that and not to don't accommodate every single request. Like, be very clear on what you want to accommodate.
And did the lead investor help attract additional investors, or did you get all the additional investors on your own?
We got all of the additional investors on our own because we had quite a few that were interested. But leading into our next fundraise eventually, it will be a mix of both, where we have contacts where we met before, and then our current primary investor will be doing heavy intros for us as well and helping us run the process.
Do you any sense yet on how much money that'll be, or do you want to keep that private?
Oh, yeah, I unfortunately had to keep it secret for now. But it's either going to be really good or really bad, nothing in between.
All right, let's talk about the last item on the agenda here, which is structuring the investor update. I get your investor updates. I think you guys do a tremendous job. Tell us a little bit about your approach to the investor update. Actually, let's start with a very simple question. How frequently do you send investor updates?
We send them out every month.
Every month. I like that dedication. Why do you do it once a month as opposed to once a quarter or twice?
Because as a startup, if you're growing and you're working towards actually helping your customers, you have a different business every 6 months. And legitimately, if you go from 3 people to 6 people, you arguably have a different business if you doubled your head count. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it changes the dynamics. And same thing with 6 to 12. Same thing if you have 3 to 6 customers to 10 to 20. Those metrics change monthly. They can change weekly, especially if you're in software as a service. They can change daily with huge spikes. And doing it monthly allows you to communicate to investors that can actually help you navigate those changes.
Okay, and then tell us about your approach to the monthly update. You do a couple interesting things in there that I think you do quite well. So I'll let you talk about them.
Yeah, our approach is actually unorthodox, to be very clear. So the basic approach, which we originally started with, it's not what we're doing now. And the basic approach is your key metrics, even if you're not happy with them, so that your investors know what's going on and they can help you. At least one graph of your key metrics so they can look at it quickly, hopefully. And basic things like how much cash, how much burn rate, your current runway, and then asks, do you need help from them? Be clear about it. Because the most common mistakes are avoiding putting updates on things that are not going well. In our case, we went a step further. We included context. So it was more actually the story of what was going on, both inside the business. Who did we hire? Why did we hire that person? What they bring to the table? What is going on with our customers in the qualitative aspect, not just quantitative? What are they working on? How is the industry improving? And what are the key points that are changing at a higher level within our entire industry that we know about? And we put those in the letter so that there is full context on why our burn is why it is and why our numbers are where they're at, to actually help people understand what's going on.
Yeah, I do actually really like that. It becomes feels like a professional newsletter that tells kind of the inside story of what's happening at the company. You share fun testimonials from customers. You do all kinds of cool stuff in there that gives you kind of the human side of the story. Absolutely.
Yes, I did spend time designing it to the point of graphics every month.
How much time does it take you to prepare that newsletter? Would you say?
Not too long now. It's really the longest time is the first one.
Yeah.
Once you get the good template, I spent a bunch of time designing the actual newsletter, the HTML and the structure, making sure we had the key points down. Because once we have the core headings and where we wanted to put certain things, then after that, it is only a day or two to do it every month. But the first time was a full week of effort to really dial in. Here's what we want to say. Here's what we want to do. And then after that, it's fairly quick.
Do you, so it takes a day or two a month. Do you get a day or two a month of value out of it, or do you have any specific examples of how it's, kind of knocked it out of the park? I assume that it's highly variable as to whether something comes out of it?
Yes, I should clarify by day or 2 or month, that would be the duration, but the actual effort is probably 2 to 3 hours maximum if it's a huge update. We do get a lot of positive feedback, and we do get intros to our asks, and we do get intros to customers is probably the most common thing. Investors will reach out and ask like, hey, I heard about this. Have you guys seen it? And it really keeps us involved in the relationship. So it does definitely pan out. The other thing is it is an internal forcing function to look at all those metrics regardless, to the point where we actually take that same version. We do trim out really specific stuff, but we actually do send it internally as well to all our employees at the same time.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question, because how different is it from your own internal update? Sounds like it's basically the same.
It is more or less the same. We do take out a lot of the super investor specific like finance parts of it, because what an employee gonna use that for anyways? Like it's extra space in the email almost. But we give our employees the exact same info otherwise that we would give to investors. So they also have the same context, even though they're there. It's kind of like in advance of continuing to grow. It is that constant repetition every day, over and over again,
Yeah.
which if you're the person doing it will feel unnecessary, but it'll always help somebody else who is further out or newer, or is maybe part-time to feel connected to the business.
I just lost my next question. It was an important one too. All right, we're almost out of time though, so we're gonna wrap this up pretty quick here. If my last question comes back to me. I completely lost it.
Do you also provide the update to interested investors or people that you've like kind of soft circled that are like around the pond?
That was my question, Tim. That was my question. Thank you for asking.
Excellent. Yes, but we're extraordinarily specific about it. So we only do that for really key people and those in our network that we have really good relationships with, that we want to make sure we keep involved. I would definitely not do it willy-nilly for even those that you're like, oh, I really want this person for Series A. I wouldn't even necessarily do it then. That is, this person actively is still engaged with you, even though they're not invested.
I see. It's like they're almost like an informal advisor at this point and potentially an investor in the future, or is that actually secondary to adding them?
Yeah, that advisement is actually probably the best way to put it. This person may or may not be an investor even, but they provide enough support and advisement that them having this actually helps your company. I mean, it is an ideal scenario if it's like a perfect investor candidate and maybe you are just literally too small for the sizes of funds they deploy and they're just chomping at the bit, but they're actually helping you before then. That would be a good example of where it could be useful, but I would still edit it. Because if they're not invested necessarily, you do want to give them what would be useful and cut out what maybe not.
Yeah. So do you have anyone on the list right now that's like, this person could be in our next round when we raise more money, and so I'm keeping them on the email list now and they're helping us? Does anyone fit in that category?
We do have a handful of people, and we truncate a lot of it to more qualitative progress and overall macro ecosystem and industry impact versus being direct. If it's a deck kind of style, it'd be similar to like the in-betweener style deck that you might hear about that you would use between your seed and Series A, where it is less specific, but still lets you know progress.
Yeah. Okay. Tim, any final questions or thoughts for Ledgy? I think we can maybe wrap it up here.
Yeah, no, I'm super impressed. I don't think I haven't heard from you in 13 months or 14 months since the summit, and like the level of growth is amazing. So awesome work. This is awesome.
Oh, thank you. And I will throw my email into the chat here. If people want to ask more questions, they can email me directly. But yeah, it is great to talk.
Well, maybe I'll just if you don't mind, humor us with one final thought, which is being an entrepreneur from Edmonton, Alberta. Are people taking you seriously when you go down to Silicon Valley, when you go to Singapore, when you go talk to people from the world? Does anyone care about that, or does it even come up?
It comes up, and it is very interesting how many people, including partners of extremely large funds, will be like, "Oh, I lived in Edmonton," or "Oh, my brother lives there." They're like, "Oh yeah, we were there for a little bit," even in places overseas, and like you expect, people will be like, "Where is Edmonton? Is it in California?" Or like, "What is a red deer?" Like those kinds of things. Uh, I feel it's important to recognize that, given just how business can work now, you can be based in Edmonton and still have a global reach. We have shipped out to almost every every continent on the planet now with our products, and we're make it in downtown Edmonton. It is, as more of us start to do it, the more visible we will become. But it's entirely possible for everyone on this call to help make that happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, great way to end it, Leggy. And thanks so much for joining us. I'll just give a quick shout out to it's almost like alumni week here at TNT. We've got all 5 alumni from our last summit that raised money joining us this Thursday. And so that'll be a lot of fun. Check out that pitch night and join us at the happy hour on Thursday. So thanks for coming, Leggy. Enjoy the rest of your week. And thanks, everybody else.
Thanks, everybody.
Here.